Hauntings, horror fans, and welcome to this week's episode of Megan's Murder Movies. I'm your host Megan, and this week we are diving into another Stephen King book-to-movie adaptation. I'm super excited to talk about The Shining, a classic, one of my favorites. Really excited, so without further ado, let's jump into a summary. Jack Torrance becomes the winter caretaker at the isolated Overlook Hotel in Colorado, hoping to cure his writer's block. He settles in along with his wife Wendy and his son Danny, who is plagued by psychic premonitions. As Jack's writing goes nowhere and Danny's visions become more disturbing, Jack discovers the hotel's dark secrets and begins to unravel into a homicidal maniac hell-bent on terrorizing his family. We've got the summary. Let's jump into a cast breakdown. This movie is so amazing. We'll talk, of course, about book-to-movie differences because there's a couple of them. Stephen King has talked about how he did not like this adaptation of the film from his book, but we'll get into that when we get there. But first, we're going to start with director Stanley Kubrick. So Stanley was an American film director, producer, screenwriter, and photographer. He is frequently cited as one of the greatest filmmakers in cinematic history. His films, almost all of which are adaptations of novels or short stories, cover a wide range of genres and are noted for their realism, dark humor, unique cinematography, extensive set designs, and evocative use of music, which we will talk a lot about the extensive set designs in this because there's a lot of just amazing set pieces. And yeah, watching this movie through this lens of, kind of analyzing things, I noticed so many more aspects that were just so amazing. And so I'm really excited to talk about those when we get there. So while many of Kubrick's films were controversial and initially received mixed reviews upon release, particularly the brutal A Clockwork Orange in 1971, he pulled that from circulation in the UK following a mass media frenzy. A lot of his films were actually nominated for Oscars, Golden Globes, or BAFTA awards and underwent critical reevaluations. For the 18th century period film Barry Lyndon, which came out in 1975, Kubrick obtained lenses developed by Zeiss for NASA to film scenes under natural candlelight. With the horror film The Shining, which was released in 1980, he became one of the first directors to make use of a Steadicam for stabilize and fluid tracking shots, a technology vital to his Vietnam War film Full Metal Jacket in 1987. His last film, Eyes Wide Shut, was completed shortly before his death in 1999 at the age of 70. So again, while, Stanley was the director, he also wrote the screenplay along with Diane Johnson. So Diane is an American novelist and essayist whose satirical novels often feature American heroines living abroad in contemporary France, and she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for her novel Persian Nights in 1988. She came on to do the screenplay with Stanley after he kind of decided he didn't like Stephen King's screenplay that he had written. So next we can jump into the cast. So we'll start with our kind of I don't know if I would say that Jack is the main character. He is and he's not because Danny's such a huge part of it. We'll say he's the co-main character. But so Jack Torrance is played by the phenomenal Jack Nicholson, and Jack is a retired American actor and filmmaker. In many of his films, he played the eternal outsider or drifter, someone who rebels against the social structure. He's known for having played a wide range of starring and supporting roles, including comedic characters, romantic leads, anti-heroes, and villains. He received numerous accolades throughout his career, which spanned over 5 decades, including 3 Academy Awards. His most known and celebrated films include dramas such as the road drama Easy Rider in 1969, the drama 5 Easy Pieces in 1970, and the psychological drama One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975. The comedy dramas Terms of Endearment, As Good as It Gets, and About Schmidt, and the neo-noir miniseries Chinatown. He's also known for The Pledge, of course The Shining, the superhero film Batman, the legal drama A Few Good Men, Anger Management, Something's Gotta Give, The Departed, The Two Jakes. He's been in so many different things. There was a sequel to Chinatown. He has 12 Academy Award nominations, making him the most nominated male actor in the Academy's history. He has won the Academy Award for Best Actor twice, once for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and once for As Good as It Gets, and he also won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Terms of Endearment. He is one of the only 3 male actors to win 3 Academy Awards and one of only 2 actors to be nominated for an Academy Award for acting in films made in every decade from the 1960s to the 2000s. He's won 6 Golden Globe Awards and received the Kennedy Center Honor in 2001, and in 1994, he became one of the youngest actors to be awarded the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. So Jack Nicholson is just phenomenal and amazing, and I'm sure you will recognize him. If you have not seen The Shining yet, which you have not, please go watch it. Please read the book if you're a fan of reading. It's amazing. And spoiler, not really a spoiler, but next week we'll be talking about Dr. Sleep, which, don't tell Stephen King, but I think I like a little bit more than The Shining. Dr. Sleep is amazing, and I can't wait to talk about that one. But this week we're talking about The Shining. We're keeping it original, and next we're going to talk about Shelley Duvall, who plays Wendy Torrance. So Shelley is an American retired actress and producer who is known for her portrayals of distinct, eccentric characters. Duvall was the recipient of several accolades across her career, including a Cannes Film Festival Award and a Peabody Award. She also received a British Academy Film Award nomination and 2 Primetime Emmy Award nominations. She was born in Texas and began acting after being discovered by director Robert Altman, who was impressed with her upbeat presence and cast her in the black comedy film Brewster McCloud in 1970. She was a bit hesitant to become an actress, but she continued working with Altman and appeared in McCabe and Miss Miller, Thieves Like Us, and her breakthrough role came with Altman's film Nashville, and she earned widespread acclaim with the drama Three Women in 1977. Also directed by Altman, so they spent a lot of time together, and that was the film that she won the Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Actress and then earned a nomination for the British Academy Film Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role. That same year, she appeared in a supporting role as a writer for Rolling Stone in Woody Allen's satirical romantic comedy Annie Hall, and she even hosted Saturday Night Live. In the 1980s, she became famous for her leading roles, which included Olive Oil and Altman's live-action feature version of Popeye, and then, of course, in The Shining. She appeared in Terry Gilman's fantasy film Time Bandits in 1981, a short comedy horror film Frankenweenie in 1984, and the comedy Roxanne in 1987. She ventured into producing television programming aimed at children and youth in the later half of the 80s, notably creating and hosting the programs Fairy Tale Theater from 1982 to 1987, Tall Tales and Legends from 1985 to 1987, and that earned her a Primetime Emmy Award nomination in 1988. She also did Nightmare Classics in 1989, and she sporadically worked in acting throughout the 90s, notably playing supporting roles in The Underneath, The Portrait of a Lady, and her last performance was in Manna from Heaven in 2002, after which she retired from acting. Duvall has since kept out of public media, keeping her personal life generally private. Then we will go on to what I would say is our main character, Danny, or Doc Torrance, who is played by Danny Lloyd. So Lloyd was born in Illinois, and his first and best known role is that of Danny Torrance in The Shining. He was selected for the role due to his ability to maintain his concentration for extended periods. In the DVD commentary by Garrett Brown and John Baxter, they state that Kubrick was able to film all of Lloyd's scenes without the 6-year-old actor realizing he was in a horror film. They told him he was in a drama piece, so he didn't know until much, much later, I think when he was 16 or 17, that The Shining was even a horror film. He was led to believe that he was just acting in a drama film about a family who lived in a hotel, like I stated. Lloyd was interviewed in Making The Shining in 1980, filmed by Kubrick's daughter Vivian. Despite the well-received performance in The Shining, Lloyd retired from acting at the age of 10 after his appearance as young G. Gordon Liddy in the television film Will G. Gordon Liddy in 1982. And then in 2004, Lloyd became associate professor at the Department of Biology at Elizabethtown Community and Technical College in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And in 2019, Lloyd appeared as a cameo role as a spectator at a baseball game in The Shining sequel Dr. Sleep, which was his first acting role in 36 years. So I will definitely point that out when we watch Dr. Sleep, or when we talk about Dr. Sleep, like where he's at in the film, and point out which character he is and all of that stuff. But I loved that touch that they added him in there and brought him back, since he hadn't acted in a while. So you really wouldn't recognize him at all because he hadn't really done much. Again, this is all stuff for Dr. Sleep. But we'll talk about that more. But yeah, just a little fun fact now to hopefully get you listening to next week's episode. Next, we will talk about Scatman Crothers, who plays Dick Halloran. Scatman was born Benjamin Sherman Crothers in 1910, but is known professionally as Scatman Crothers. He's an American actor and musician and is known for playing Louis the Garbage Man on the TV show Chico and the Man, and then, of course, Dick Halloran in The Shining. He was also a prolific voice actor who provided the voices of Meadowlark Lemon in the Harlem Globetrotters animated TV series, Jazz, the Autobot in Transformers and the Transformers movie, the title character Hong Kong Phooey, and Scat Cat in the animated film The Aristocats. And then the last people that we will talk about are Lisa and Louise Burns, who play the Grady twins, or the Grady sisters. So they were born in 1968. Actresses best known for The Shining, Kids, and From Borehamwood Wood to Hollywood, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Elstree in 2014. So that's kind of the main cast that we need to know about. Now we're going to get into the fun facts. So the Overlook Hotel was based on thousands of different reference photos. So Stephen King actually got the idea for The Shining after he stayed at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. But the Overlook is not directly, supposed to look like the Stanley Hotel. So the winding and patterned interior of the Overlook was based on thousands of reference photos that Stanley Kubrick and his team gathered from photographing various American hotels, but the exterior shots were taken at the Timberline Lodge located in Oregon, which of course is where I'm from, and I've actually been to the Timberline Lodge just once, but it was really cool to go and see kind of the outside of, you can definitely tell if you go see that, that's exactly where they took pictures from, and it's pretty amazing. But again, Stephen King got the idea from the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, which is on my bucket list to go to. I want to go so bad. Oh, one day. I'll go stay in the haunted room. So Stephen King, like I mentioned before, actually wrote a script for the film. He drafted a screenplay, but according to David Hughes, one of Stanley Kubrick's biographers, the director did not bother to read it. He kind of just threw it to the side and then collaborated with Diane Johnson instead. So Jack Nicholson actually helped write a scene, which doesn't sound surprising because he's such a great actor. So I imagine, him getting into roles, he really can influence, what his character is, and has a good idea of what each of his characters is wanting to do. So Nicholson felt a personal connection to the scene in the movie where his character erupts in fury with his wife while in the midst of writer's block. As he told the New York Times in 1986, that scene at the typewriter, that's what I was like when I got my divorce. I was under the pressure of being a family man with a daughter, and one day I accepted a job to act in a movie in the daytime, and I was writing a movie at night, and I'm back in my little corner, and my beloved wife, Sandra, walked in on what was, unbeknownst to her, this maniac, and I told Stanley about it, and he wrote it into the scene, which I think is good because I feel like that scene really progresses the plot line of us seeing Jack's kind of demise and fall at, the negativity and kind of the bad spirits that inhabit the Overlook Hotel. So the movie actually inspired a bunch of conspiracy theories, which we won't get into. If it's something people are interested in, I guess I could do like a smaller mini-sode about all the different conspiracy theories, or you can just go check out the movie Room 237, which they kind of go through all of the different conspiracy theories. But one of the big theories they talk about in Room 237 is that Kubrick made The Shining as his confession for helping to fake the moon landing, which I've not actually watched the movie Room 237, but I need to because that just sounds like a lot, but I also just feel like it's going to mess with my brain, so I don't know if I want to watch it, but I'm also very curious. So if people are very interested in that, let me know, and I guess I can give it a watch and give you guys a little breakdown. But yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about The Shining, which are not specifically about The Shining, but that have come from the movie that relate to other like big world issues, which I don't think it's that deep, to be honest. So one thing we'll talk about when we do like the scene by scene and kind of more of the book to movie stuff is that in The Shining, there's this giant hedge maze. So on the grounds of the hotel, there's a huge maze, and these hedges are probably 20 feet tall. Like, it's big. And this maze was actually erected on set. Like, this wasn't just, they had a couple, little squares and they would just film different angles and make it look like it was a lot bigger than it was. They had the whole maze built, and I guess Kubrick actually got lost in the maze. He was concerned that the hedge maze was too easy to solve, and the crew was like, no, like, why don't you go in and try and get your way out? And he went in one morning to do that because he thought it was too easy, and then he couldn't get out. And he wasn't the only one. The scene where Jack chases his son Danny through the hedges took a month to shoot, partly because the crew members kept getting lost and had to use their walkie-talkies for help, so it would prolong the shooting every day because, they'd have to stop and reconnect, and it was just kind of a mess, it seemed like. Kind of going back to Jack Nicholson being a great actor, he actually improvised the line, "Here's Johnny," so one of the film's most iconic lines wasn't even in the script. Jack Nicholson ad-libbed the famous line from The Tonight Show while filming the scene when he was in character. Basically, it's the scene where he's taking the axe to the bathroom door. And it worked, and they liked it, so it stayed in the film. So in the novel, the room isn't 237, it's 217, but the owners of the Timberline Lodge in Oregon requested that the room be changed to 237 because the Timberline Lodge doesn't have a 237, but they do have a 217, and they were worried that people would avoid that and not be willing to stay in it if that was in the film, which I kind of think it would have had the opposite effect, because if there was a room 237 at the Timberline Lodge, I'd be staying there every year on my birthday. That would be, I would definitely go, and I would specifically want to stay in that room. But I do understand why maybe they would think that's not the smartest move in terms of their hotel marketing. So speaking of phenomenal acting choices, another fun fact is that Danny Lloyd actually brought the character, quote-unquote, the character of Tony to life with his finger. So despite not knowing that he was actually creating a horror movie, Lloyd actually improvised one of the creepiest aspects of the film, which was the idea to change his voice and flex his finger up and down to animate his imaginary friend Tony. Kubrick loved the idea, and it became very central to the movie. So then, in terms of kind of prop and things in the film, Kubrick's secretary is responsible for a key prop in the film. So there's a famous scene where Shelley Duvall's character Wendy finds pages of writing that Jack has been typing, endlessly working on while they've been at the hotel. And it just has the words, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," written over and over and over and over and over again for like 500 pages. And so she had to, apparently his secretary had to type out all of these different, pages with writing, and some of the pages actually look like it's supposed to be different dialogue, like it's very kind of like screenplay looking, how it's all formatted. Some of it almost looks like it's iambic pentameter, like how it's written. It's really interesting, but of course all of the words are just "all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." So apparently she typed out all 500 pages of that and then recreated them in 5 other languages for the international releases. So that was probably a really fun day on set for her. So then now let's talk about poor Shelley Duvall. So she lost her hair during filming. She later shared after filming that Kubrick was extremely hard on her during filming, and it really had an impact on her health. She quoted in David Hughes' biography, "I was really in and out of ill health because the stress of the role was so great. Stanley pushed me and prodded me further than I've ever been pushed before. It's the most difficult role I've ever had to play." So he, honestly, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but Stanley is kind of a jerk. He's actually a big asshole. He would scream and yell at her. He was very, aggressive toward her, made her kind of personal assistants wake her up in the middle of the night. So this poor woman, was not given adequate food, was not given time to rest, actually sleep. Stanley kept telling Jack Nicholson that he needed to be mean to her even when they weren't filming to keep her in kind of that role of being scared of Jack. And I just really feel for her because I can't imagine, yes, of course, you're filming a horror movie, so I get, there's things you want to do to get into character, but I can't imagine that feeling of walking onto set and really feeling like everyone kind of hates you or everyone's out to get you must have just been a totally terrible thing for her mind, and I really feel for her. Even though the movie's great and she's an amazing part of it and she really did an amazing job, I feel like it's not fair that she was kind of pushed as far without consenting to that. If she would have been like, yeah, like, everyone can be a jerk to me because I want to be afraid, but she didn't, and they just kind of purposely fucked with her, which I think that's not okay. So then another famous scene in The Shining is, of course, the bloody elevator, and that scene took a full year to film. So any fan of the movie, of course, is going to know the famous scene of the elevator doors opening and a sea of blood pouring out. Well, they eventually got it in 3 shots, unlike several other scenes that required many, many more shots. Each take for the elevator shot required 9 days to clean up the hallway and fill the elevator with blood again, and it was not complete for a year. So it took, that scene, which is so iconic, but was one of the most difficult scenes to film, to get all the blood just right, and cleaning everything up, and bringing in the new furniture, or cleaning the furniture, whatever it was just a lot. But they only had to do it in 3 takes, which, that elevator scene, I feel better for the furniture in that than the poor doors that were beat up during that bathroom scene. So 60 doors were beat up on and killed with an axe during that famous scene where Jack is trying to break through the bathroom door to get to Wendy and Danny. And it took over... It was filmed over the course of 3 days and involved the destruction of 60 doors before they felt like they got it right. So then, of course, this film is supposed to take place in the winter. They're staying at the hotel to take care of it while it's really snowy and no one can get to the hotel. And the snow on set was actually made of salt and styrofoam. So at the film's end, there's, of course, this iconic chase scene where Jack is chasing Danny through the hedge maze in the snow. It's a really, really great scene. It's really tense, really kind of terrifying. The lighting, the music, the movement, all amazing. But as real as it appeared and as cold as it feels to watch, because it looks so snowy and they have steam coming out of the actor's mouths, it's done so well. Like 10 out of 10, Stanley, you directed that scene beautifully. But the snow was actually created from 900 tons of salt and crushed styrofoam, which I feel like is good because that would suck to really have to be poor Danny. I mean, the snow in the scene comes up to like his mid-calf, and if that was actual snow, that poor kid probably would have lost his legs. So then another fun fact, we're getting to the end of our fun facts, but another fun fact, kind of a spooky fact, I guess, is that the set actually burned down. So a huge fire broke out toward the end of shooting, and it destroyed several set pieces that had to be rebuilt for them to finish everything. And ironically, the book ends with the hotel burning down, which is kind of interesting and a little bit spooky, and there's actually a picture of Stanley Kubrick standing in front of, the charred set laughing, because he's like, oh my gosh, what a weird coincidence that in my movie I'm actually not having it end with the hotel burning down. He doesn't add that in, but it kind of burns down anyway a little bit. And then the last fun fact that I mentioned a little bit earlier was that Stephen King didn't really like the movie. So according to a 1983 interview Stephen King did with Playboy, while he had great expectations for the movie and is a huge admirer of Kubrick's, he was deeply disappointed in the outcome and felt that several parts fell flat. That's, I think, a great segue going into book versus movie differences. So the first one that we will talk about is that the hedges in the book were a lot more lifelike. So in King's novel, the hedges were actually animals that came to life toward the end of the movie and kind of run around and are pretty spooky. I mean, if you imagine a big elephant hedge chasing you, that's probably also pretty scary. Kubrick, however, didn't think that it was feasible to recreate, which is how the film ended with its epic hedge maze chase scene instead. So then kind of the idea of how the hotel is haunted is pretty different versus the movie than the book. So in the book The Shining, it's very clear in true Stephen King fashion that the Overlook Hotel is haunted. There are ghosts and things that go bump in the night, and like I mentioned, even the hedges on the grounds come to life. The supernatural is very apparent and very real in this version of the story, and these ghosts and ghouls are kind of what drive Jack mad. But in the movie, the nature of Jack's descent into madness is much more ambiguous and seems to take place kind of all in his head rather than supernatural forces making him nuts. It's his own mental health that falls apart without the influence of ghosts or spirits. I mean, we do get kind of him influenced by ghosts toward the end, but he's already kind of at that point, I feel like, where he's susceptible in his mental health. It seems like in the book, in the movie, at least how I see it, is that he's kind of already broken down when they get to the hotel, which makes him more susceptible to the influence, and so we don't have to see a lot of the ghosts kind of poking and prodding their way in and chipping at his mental health, like we do in the book. So rather than actual ghosts, the movie presents the supernatural as all in the character's head, more due to the isolation and writer's block that he experiences, and then because of all of these things going on in his head, he's a little bit more susceptible when the ghosts do come, like Grady, which we'll talk about in the scene by scene. Once Grady shows up and is like, yeah, I think that your son and your wife need to be corrected, or do you have what it takes to do that? He's like, yeah, I do. And it seems kind of like a big leap, whereas in the book we get that slow mental breakdown of the ghost kind of messing with Jack and him slowly giving into what they're wanting from him. And so then the famous twins that are another kind of iconic image when you think The Shining are actually not in the book. So, it's kind of one of those famous visions that, when you hear The Shining, the first thing that pops in your head is the vision of these twin girls in these blue dresses at the end of the hallway as Danny rides around on his tricycle. It's a classic scene. It's been parodied many times. It's a classic scene, but it doesn't appear in the book. The Grady family murders are discussed in the book, of course, but the girls aren't twins, and they aren't seen by Danny as visions as they are in the movie. Even though they're kind of shown as twins in the movie, even in the movie, Ullman, the kind of manager of the hotel, says that the sisters, are 10 and 8. I think if you pay close enough attention, you can tell that one's a tiny bit younger. I mean, 8 and 10, probably, body sizes are relatively the same. One of the twins, quote unquote, does look a teensy bit shorter, so you could see, how maybe they're not twins, but they hired twins to play them, which I think is just really interesting. But yeah, they're actually not twins, they're just sisters. And then another iconic scene that you think of when you think The Shining is also not in the book, and that's the bleeding elevator. If you don't think of the twins when you first think of The Shining, you may think of, the blood that pours out of the elevator, but it's a scene that was just created by Stanley Kubrick. The scene works great on film, but it probably wouldn't have had the same kind of effect if it had been written. Even though Stephen King is amazing with language and painting a picture, but I feel like, the elevator blood scene would have been really hard to write and make work. So another big thing that's in the movie but not in the book is the famous all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So the scene when Jack's wife Wendy discovers what Jack has been writing the whole time is a pivotal and shocking moment in the movie, but it was made up for the movie. So in the book, Jack is actually writing a story based on the Overlook Hotel, while in the movie he never cures his writer's block, and it's a key component of the psychosis. So in the book, Jack is kind of going through old archives of the hotel, finding out different, stories, different parties that were hosted, different people that stayed there, all these different things. And that's when he kind of starts being visited by the ghosts and starts kind of having these visions or these going into these trances where he's starting to slowly lose his mind. So he has like a full-fledged idea, and he's, writing stuff about these characters, and he's pulling characters from, real life and from pictures he's finding in the hotel and all of these things. But in the movie, he's just writing the same line over and over because he's got writer's block. And then, of course, like I mentioned, the hedge maze in the movie was actually large hedge animals in the book. So then another difference is that the main characters' deaths are completely different. So very famously in the movie The Shining, Jack freezes to death after being unable to catch Danny in the maze. An iconic shot of frozen Jack Nicholson has become one of the most enduring and memed images in cinema history. I'm sure even if you've not seen The Shining, but you saw that picture, you'd be like, oh yes, of course, I didn't realize that was from that. If you're not a horror fan, which is very understandable, but that's a pretty iconic one. But in the book, Jack doesn't freeze to death. Instead, he's lured into the boiler room of the Overlook and blown up. Which, in the book, the manager of the hotel, when he's kind of giving Jack his duties for the winter, he says that you need to turn the boiler on every day so that, and of course, it heats the hotel. But the boiler's a little tricky and will slowly just keep turning itself up throughout the day. So if you don't check on it, it's like every 6 hours or something, it will turn itself all the way up and could actually catch fire. So you just need to come down periodically, or maybe it's 8 hours, so like you can sleep through the night and it's fine. But you just need to come down every 8 hours, turn it back down, not off, but down, and then it'll slowly work its way back up, and then, you just turn it down again, and everything will be fine. So just don't forget the boiler, and you're gonna be good. But of course, he's so caught up in his rage and, his kind of breakdown and possession, I guess you could say, that he forgets about the boiler, and the Overlook is in turn blown up at the end of the book. And so then one of the last book to movie differences we're going to talk about is the character of Wendy. She's very different in the novel than she is in the movie. So one, she looks completely different. Her personality is also different. So in the book, Wendy is described as a blonde, while Shelley Duvall, of course, is, dark hair, either really dark brown or black hair. And then in the book, she's also described as having movie star quality beauty, while Shelley Duvall plays the role of kind of just your average, average mother. Beautiful, but, I wouldn't say like movie star quality, but just a regular average pretty lady. So more importantly, in the book The Shining, Wendy has a much stronger and more independent personality. She stands up to Jack in a much more firmer and stronger way than Wendy in the movie does. And in the movie, Wendy is like meeker and much more under the influence of Jack's more violent tendencies. And there are other slight differences in The Shining, kind of like how Danny interacts with his imaginary friend Tony, and how much shine Danny has, or how he uses it in the novel. Red rum also appears in the novel very early on in Danny's head. So before we get into this, there is one thing that I want to go into, which we'll talk more about in the scene-by-scene breakdown. But if you're not a Stephen King fan and you don't know much about this, I want to give you the information on what The Shining is, or what the shine is. So in the book, when Danny meets the chef, Dick Halloran, Dick realizes that Danny has what's called the shining, which is, kind of a special power to be able to kind of see into the future, or see glimmers into people's lives, or hear conversations, or kind of read people's minds, all these different things. It's like a little special telepathic power that Danny has, we realize Dick has, and we'll realize later on that many, many more people have when we kind of get into the Dr. Sleep universe, or the Dr. Sleep sequel. Anyway, I just want to make that clear of like what the shine is and why this is called The Shining. We'll talk about it in the scene by scene when we get there, but yeah, I just know that that's confusing for people who don't know. They're like, well, why isn't it called the Overlook, or why isn't it called the hotel? Like, why is it called The Shining? And it's like, because that's what Danny has. But unless you read the book or really pay attention to that little bit in the movie, you might not catch on to that. So that's what the shine or the shining is, and it's something that within the Stephen King universe, quite a few of his characters have. Some have a lot of that power and know what it is. Others have a little bit of that power and maybe don't realize that that's like a special thing or something. But yeah, that's a classic kind of theme in some of his novels, is the idea of the shine. So now that we know the cast and we know some fun facts, and I've broke down some of the book to movie differences, let's jump in with a scene by scene. I'm so excited to get started with this one. I think I watched this, I've seen this movie quite a few times, but I think in prepping for the podcast, I think I watched it like 6 times in a row, and I didn't get tired of it. Like I was like, well, I think I got everything. Like, I have all the notes done, but let's watch it one more time. Like, I didn't realize how much I thoroughly enjoyed it, and this is one that probably could be a desert island movie for me, because I just really did not get tired of it. I know that Dr. Sleep is like that for me, but I kind of didn't expect to feel that way with The Shining, to feel like I could just watch it whenever and be totally fine with that. But without further ado, let's get into a scene by scene breakdown. So we start with these really awesome aerial shots of this lake and these mountains. A car is driving these really windy roads. It's a really cool shot. These were actually shot in Montana. These scenes weren't shot in Oregon, and they used a Steadicam on a helicopter. So Stanley Kubrick called in this really famous cameraman, who I forgot his name, to do these shots because he's notorious for being, getting smooth shots with a helicopter. So really cool shots. So we see all of this as the opening credits roll, and this really just further shows how far disconnected the hotel is from, kind of a city or other civilization, because it takes a good couple of minutes. We see this car driving these roads, and as we're getting those opening credits, and then we see what is the Timberline Lodge, but what is technically in the film the Overlook Hotel. So we see a man walking into the hotel. He's walking through the lobby. He speaks with the woman at the front desk and says that his name is Jack Torrance, and he has an appointment with Mr. Ullman. He has an interview with Mr. Ullman. Jack goes into the office, and we see people kind of throughout the lobby of the hotel. Seems kind of busy. People are coming and going. Jack and Mr. Ullman seem to hit it off, and Mr. Ullman asks for Bill to join them, another worker at the hotel. Now we jump to Wendy and Danny, Jack's wife and son. They're relaxing at their apartment and talking about if they think Jack will get the job at the hotel. Wendy says it would be super fun to live there over the winter. We learn that Danny doesn't really have many friends, and so he's like, yeah, I guess maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Wendy asks if Tony is excited, and Tony is not. Wendy tells both of them, Tony being the imaginary friend that lives in Danny's mouth, Wendy tells the two of them to wait and see, and they'll probably have a really good time. Back at the interview, we see that Jack is getting the job, and he's talking with Bill and Mr. Ullman some more. We learned that Jack used to be a teacher, but he's now focusing on writing. We also learned that the season goes from May 15th to October 30th, and that's really just too costly to keep the hotel open over the winter. The 25-mile stretch of road that they would really need to work to keep clear can get up to 20 feet of snow, and it's just too much cost to try and keep that road clear in the winter. We also learned that the Overlook was built in 1907, and during that time there was really no interest in skiing or anything winter sports like that, so it wasn't built to stay open in the winter. Ullman explains that the winters can be really cruel, and that heating the hotel and doing some minor damage control is kind of what the job would entail. He also explains that the isolation is probably the hardest thing to deal with, but Jack is hoping for some isolation to work on his new writing project, and says that this is exactly what he's looking for. He says that his family's gonna love it. And then Ullman goes on to explain that one caretaker in the 1970s murdered his family in the hotel with an axe and then killed himself with a shotgun. Police chalked it up to cabin fever, and Jack goes, oh, well, that's quite the story, but that's not gonna happen to me. And he also explains that Wendy loves mysteries and ghost stories and horror films. Same. So, his wife's not going to have an issue with, that kind of having taken place in the hotel at one point. So now we're back at the apartment with Danny and Wendy. Danny is in the bathroom, and he's talking to himself in the mirror, but he's actually talking with Tony. And Tony says, Jack's going to call in just a minute and say he got the job. I can't do that. I'm not going to try and do the Tony voice. But Tony essentially says, Jack's going to call and say that he got the job. And then we jump to Wendy in the kitchen, and the phone rings. It's Jack, and he got the job. He's like, I've not gotten on the road yet, so I'm probably going to be home late. So, don't worry, but we're kind of wrapping things up here. We see Danny and Tony are still talking, and Tony's like, I really don't want to go. And Danny keeps asking him why. He's like, why? Why don't you want to go? What's wrong? Why won't you tell me? Please tell me. All this stuff. Danny's begging him to tell him. And then we get that bloody elevator scene. And we also see a shot of the twins and what looks to be Danny screaming. Next, we see Danny in his bed, and a woman is checking on him and kind of seeing if there's something wrong with him. This woman, Danny, and Wendy are in his room, and this woman's asking him some questions. We learn that she's a doctor. He can't really remember what happened, just that he was talking to Tony before brushing his teeth, and then his mom was telling him to wake up. Danny describes Tony, like I mentioned, as the little boy who lives in his mouth, and Wendy further explains that Tony is Danny's imaginary friend, and Danny explains that Tony likes to hide. The doctor recommends that Danny stay in bed for the rest of the day and just relax. Wendy and the doctor go into the living room and kind of talk more about Danny while he's relaxing in his room. The doctor explains that Danny is just going through a phase and that he's going to be fine. She says things like this probably won't happen again. This tends to happen with kids, and sometimes there's no explanation. And the doctor tries to learn more about Danny and the family. We learn that Danny didn't really like school when he first started. He had a really hard time making friends. Then he got hurt, so he was out of school for a while. And when the doctor kind of prompts about, how did he get hurt? We learn that Jack accidentally dislocated Danny's shoulder one night when he was drunk and got mad at Danny for making a mess in his office. Wendy explains that Jack said he would never touch another drop, and he hasn't since that night 5 months ago. And throughout this whole conversation, I feel like you can tell that Wendy's trying to make it sound like, it was just an accident, like he just grabbed his arm like you would, a kid who was going to run out in the street, or, a kid who was getting ready to fall, like, you just grab them and you don't think anything of it until they get hurt. It was just, an accident. But I feel like Shelley Duvall, and I don't know if this is just like me reading into it or whatever, but the way that her eyes are in this scene, I feel like just kind of expresses that she is really scared of Jack, but she's just trying to make do and like doesn't want to believe that Jack would have done something on purpose or, it had to have been an accident. Like, you wouldn't do that to your child. There's that really great depth within her character of, like, she's saying one thing, but she's clearly thinking something else in that scene, which I just love. Now we see the family driving up to the Overlook. Once they get to the hotel, we see people packing up, and Ullman and Bill give Jack and Wendy a better tour of the place. First, we see the Colorado Lounge, where Jack will end up spending a lot of his time. Wendy's in shock by how grand everything is. Danny is playing darts in the game room, and he's approached by the Grady twins / sisters, whatever you want to call them. And then you just watch him for a moment, and then they leave. Ullman shows Jack and Wendy to their apartment area, but tells them that they can really stay in any room they want to. It's a cozy little place. It looks a little bit smaller than their place in Boulder, but not much. I mean, there's a nice little kitchen area and a bigger room for them, a bathroom, and then a little room for Danny. Now they're outside and pass by the hedge maze. Ullman mentions how the hotel is supposedly built on an Indian burial ground. Red flag. Terrible idea. No wonder the place is haunted. Ullman then talks about the snowcat that they have. He's like, if you guys ever need to get out of here or whatever, the snowcat should be fine for that. Pretty much operates just like a car. No big deal. Next, we see what is called the Gold Ballroom, and we learn that the alcohol is taken away from the hotel in the off-season so that they don't have to pay higher insurance fees, which makes sense. While they're talking about that, we finally get to meet Dick Halloran. He is the chef, and he shows Wendy the food stockpile that they have for the winter and kind of the entire kitchen. Dick is showing them around. He's such a nice guy. He's very kind to Danny. He keeps calling him Doc, which is kind of a inside nickname that only Wendy and Jack call him, but Dick kind of knew to call him that right off the bat, which is supposed to kind of be like why is he calling him Doc? That's really interesting. And Wendy also asks that question. She's like, how did you know to call him that? Because that's what we call him, because he really loves Bugs Bunny. And he's like, I must have heard you call him that. That's why. And then while Dick is showing Wendy the pantry, we kind of learn that both Dick and Danny have the shine, which I talked about earlier. So Jack and the others meet them in the kitchen, and they end up bringing Wendy with them to the basement to show them kind of the boiler room and all of that stuff. Danny goes with Dick to get some ice cream, and Dick explains to Danny that his grandmother also had the shining, and that's what Danny has too. Dick is asking him questions, and Danny doesn't really want to answer anything. Danny says he isn't supposed to talk about it because Tony says that he shouldn't. Danny explains that Tony tells him things, but tells Danny that he shouldn't tell anyone. Dick asks if Tony has told him stuff about the Overlook. Danny explains that Tony showed him something. Dick says the Overlook shines in a way too, and Danny asks if there's something bad. Dick says that there's traces of things left behind from things that have happened here, or are going to happen. Not all of the things that happened are good, but also not all of them are bad. He said they almost leave like a footprint. Danny asks about room 237 and what's in it, and Dick says there's nothing in it, but you should stay clear of it. Don't go anywhere near that room. There's no need for you to go in there anyway. Now it's a month later. Wendy has made some food. Danny's riding his trike around the hotel. It's this really cool shot and sound of his trike on the carpet versus the hardwood, which I noticed watching it, I think the first time for the podcast, just kind of that different noise, which I thought was really interesting. Wendy brings food to the apartment, and Jack is still asleep. Wendy really wants to go for a walk, but Jack says that he just wants to work on writing. He's like, I just want to get into it. And Wendy's trying to be really encouraging, and they start talking about the hotel, and Jack explains that he felt like he'd been there before. He's like, I know deja vu is a thing that happens, but this was really different. I really felt like I had been here before, and this is where I needed to be. Now, Jack is in the Colorado lounge playing with the tennis ball, trying to get ideas for writing, and Wendy and Danny go outside into the hedge maze and hang out for the afternoon. It's not started snowing yet. It's just a little cool. They've got big coats on, but, so far, so good in terms of keeping the hotel under control. And it would probably be like November now, since they got there on the 30th or maybe the 29th. But yeah, so it's been about a month, it's probably about end of November, and Jack is now walking through the hotel and finds a replica of the maze, kind of like a mini version on a table. And there's this really cool transition because we're like at one moment we're watching Jack kind of look at the maze over the table, and then it zooms into the table, and then we're in the maze with Wendy and Danny. And they're running around, they seem to be having a good time, enjoying the maze, trying to find their way out. Now we see it's Tuesday, and Wendy is cooking and watching TV. The news is saying that a huge snowstorm is approaching. Danny is back on his trike, and we finally see the iconic Overlook carpet. He passes room 237 and just kind of looks at the door. He gets off of his trike and goes to open the door, but it's locked, so he can't get in. Then we see a shot of the sisters, and he gets back on his trike and just keeps writing. Jack is sat at the typewriter, and he's just going for it. He seems to be flowing really well. He's typing a lot, seems to be happy with what he's typing until Wendy comes in. She walks up and just kind of asks how he's doing, and he's kind of upset and standoffish, and Wendy told him about the snow, and he goes, well, what do you want me to do about it? He gets upset and says he just wants to finish writing in peace, and she's like, well, I'll bring you some sandwiches later, maybe then, you can let me read a little bit of what you wrote while you eat. And Jack's he's a total asshole. He's like, you're distracting, and when I'm in here working, you need to not come in here. If you hear me typing, if you don't hear me typing, whatever it is, just stay the fuck out. And he's cursing at her, and she just looks like she's been slapped across the face by this man. Like, his words just smacked her right across the face. It's so rude. She's trying so hard. She's so sweet. And Jack just goes right back to typing, and now we see it's Thursday. So the snow has finally come, and it's a lot. A lot happened overnight. Wendy and Danny are playing out slides, throwing snowballs, and Jack is inside staring out a window in what looks to be kind of like a trance-like state. It's really spooky looking. He's like kind of got his head down, and he's in this like black kind of mock turtleneck type thing, and he's just staring out the window with like a very kind of angry face. And then we cut to Saturday. Jack is typing away, and Wendy is trying to get the phone to work, but the storm has messed with the lines. She gets on the radio in Ullman's office and is able to make contact with someone on the radio. She's just checking in about the storm, and the Forest Service guy says that they should keep the radio on in case they need something, and that the lines will probably be down for the rest of winter, and that's why they should keep their radio on. They say goodbye, and we see Danny riding his trike again. It really makes the hotel feel like a maze as well. He rounds all these corners, and he's going all these places, and there's, carpet changes and all this stuff. And then he rounds a corner, and we see the twins again, the sisters again. They say hello to him, and they tell him, come play with us. He has a vision of them murdered in the hallway, and he covers his eyes, and when he looks up, they're gone. Danny tells Tony that he's scared, and Tony says, remember what Mr. Halloran said. It's just like a picture in a book. It's not real. It's now Monday, and Danny and Wendy are watching TV. He asks to go to the apartment to get his fire truck, and Wendy tells him to be very, very quiet because Jack is still sleeping. He actually goes in very quietly. Like, he really doesn't make any noise aside from a little bit of a creak when he turns the doorknob, but, should not be enough to wake somebody up. But Jack's already awake, sitting up in bed. And he calls Danny over to him, and you can tell Danny does not want to go over and see his dad. And Jack kind of picks Danny up and puts him in his lap, and he's asking him weird questions, and Danny just looks totally uncomfortable. He kind of seems like he's in a trance again. He's like, how's it going, Doc? Are you having a good time? And Danny's just like, yes, Dad. Yes, Dad. And he's like, I want you to have a good time. And then Danny's like, Dad, do you feel bad? And Jack's like, no, I just feel tired, but I can't sleep. There's just too much to do. And then Danny asks him if he likes the hotel. And he says, yes, I do. I love it. Don't you? Danny's like, I guess. And then Jack says that he wishes that they could stay there forever. And then Danny asks, Dad, you would never hurt Mommy or me, would you? And Jack's like, well, what do you mean? Did your mother say that to you? And Danny's like, no, like, I'm just asking. And he's like, are you sure? And then Jack tells Danny, he's like, I love you, Danny, more than anything else. I would never do anything to hurt you. Which I do believe there's a part of Jack. Like, I don't think all of Jack is an asshole, because that's not realistic. You know, especially with Stephen King characters. Like, he works really hard, I feel like, to make his characters dimensional. There are very few of his characters that are 100% evil. And those ones are very clear, like Pennywise, the Outsider. You know, there's very clear villains, but a lot of his characters have, you know, kind of that multiple facades and, like, multiple pieces that make them up, like every human does. Which kind of, I feel like, gets into Dr. Sleep a lot, which we will talk about when we get to that one next week. So now it's Wednesday, and more snow has come, and Danny is playing with his cars in one of the hallways on the iconic carpet. He hears something at the end of the hallway and thinks/hopes that it might be his mom. When he makes his way down, he stops at room 237, and it's open, and there's a key inside. Cut to Wendy in the boiler room, changing the heating around. She hears yelling and goes to see what's going on, and it's Jack, and he's sleeping and having a nightmare. He's just yelling, like screaming. She's able to wake him up, and he says that he had a nightmare that he killed her and Danny with an axe, cut them up into little pieces. Wendy tries to calm him down, and then Danny comes in the room, and Wendy tells Danny to go play, and he's just kind of standing there sucking his thumb. And Wendy goes out to check on him, and his sweater is ripped, and it looks like he's been choked. He's got handprints around his neck, and Wendy thinks that Jack did this to him, and she scoops Danny up, and she takes him away. She's like, you fucking son of a bitch, you did this, didn't you? It's a great scene from Shelley Duvall, 10 out of 10. Love that scene. Meanwhile, Jack's just sitting in his chair, staring off into space, like, just not connected. We see Jack walking around the hotel, and he ends up going into the gold ballroom. He walks up to the bar, and he's like, I would give anything for a drink, and he starts talking to this man, Lloyd. Lloyd gives him some bourbon. Jack has his first drink in 5 months, and Jack and Lloyd chat. Jack says that he has a little problem with his family, and Lloyd's like, I understand, Mr. Torrance. Jack says that he loves Danny and would do anything for him. Jack's just really upset with Wendy because he's like, she's never going to let me forget what happened. She's always going to throw it back in my face. And Jack then tells his version of events about what happened with Danny's shoulder. Now we see Wendy coming down the same hallway. She's carrying a bat, and she's trying to find Jack, and she's crying, and she tells him someone else is in the hotel, and that's who tried to choke Danny. She says there's a woman in room 237 that tried to choke him, and you need to go check it out. I want you to go look. Now we see a TV news station from Florida, and we see Dick Halloran sitting on the bed watching TV, and he gets a shine from Danny about what happened in room 237. Danny went in, walked toward the bathroom, there's this woman in the tub, and now as the scene is kind of replaying for Dick from Danny's point of view, we're also seeing the same thing happen to Jack. So Jack has now entered the room, he's checking things out, and he sees this very young, gorgeous woman in the bathtub. She's naked, and she gets out and walks towards Jack, and he's clearly very excited about this possible encounter. Jack and the woman are now face to face, and she puts her hand on his chest and then up to his neck. He grabs her waist, and they kiss. But when Jack pulls away, the woman is now old and has all these sores on her body, like she's kind of rotting a little bit. And Dick tries to call the hotel, but of course can't get through because the lines are down. He calls the Forest Service station and asks them to radio the hotel and check in on the people up there. Wendy's in the apartment, walked in, looking very terrified, and Jack comes back, but tells her nobody was in there. He tells Wendy it was probably another episode, and Danny was the one who hurt himself, and Wendy's crying and confused. She says it may have been the wrong room. Danny's in bed and hears what they're saying, and Wendy's like, I want to leave, I want to get him out, and Jack gets really upset about the idea of them leaving. Jack gets mad at Wendy and says she has fucked his life so far, but she won't fuck this up for him. He leaves the apartment and starts making a mess in the hotel, starting in the kitchen. He's kind of just like throwing bowls around and swiping his hands on stuff so that everything crashes to the floor. He's slowly making his way back to the gold ballroom, and when he turns the hallway that the ballroom sits on, the hallway's covered in balloons, and now there's music playing. He walks in and there's this party going on. It looks very 1920s-esque based on how the women are dressed. Jack goes up to the bar again and talks with Lloyd. He gets another drink, and Lloyd tells him that his drinks are on the house. And Jack's like, well, I want to know who's buying my drinks. And Lloyd's like, well, it doesn't concern you, Mr. Torrance. Jack says, all right, whatever you say. And as Jack gets up to kind of go, I think, explore the ballroom a little bit, a waiter bumps into him and spills a couple drinks on Jack. The waiter apologizes and tells him to come with him to the gentleman's room so they can wash it up. They head to the men's room, and this set is really, really cool. It's like this, we see them at kind of the end of this hallway, walk into the bathroom, and there's sinks on the right side, and there's like urinals on the left, but this bathroom is all red and white. So like the sinks and the urinals and everything are, you know, of course, like regular like bathroom porcelain white. And then everything else is this like very bright blood red tile is what it looks like. It's really pretty. The contrast is really awesome. So then we learn that the waiter is named Grady, and Jack puts the pieces together that that's the Grady who used to be the caretaker there and the one who murdered his family. Grady says that that's not true and that Jack has been the only caretaker that he's aware of. Grady talks about his wife and daughters, and he's like, oh, they're around somewhere, like I'm not really sure where they're at right now. Jack tells him that he used to be the caretaker, and he explains to Grady what he did to his family. Grady has no memory of that happening, and Grady explains to Jack that Jack has always been the caretaker. Grady says, I should know, I've always been here. They have this little stare down, and then Grady tells Jack that Danny's planning to bring in an outsider, Dick Halloran, into the situation. They call him the N-word, and that's really unnecessary, and I don't understand why that needed to be added at all. Grady tells Jack that Danny has a very great talent and that Jack doesn't understand it enough, but that Danny's using the talent against Jack's will. And Jack says that Wendy's the real problem because she interferes, and Grady suggests that they need a good talking to and maybe a bit more. Grady says my girls didn't care for the hotel and they tried to burn it down, but he corrected them. And when his wife tried to stop him, he corrected her too. So now he seems to remember what he did when 30 seconds ago he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, well, which is it, Grady? Wendy is in the apartment crying and smoking. She says they have the snowcat and that as soon as the weather breaks, she's going to take Danny and try and get down the mountain. She's like, I will radio the Forest Service so that they can keep an eye out for us if we don't make it. And if Jack won't come with us, then we'll just go by ourselves. And then we hear Red Rum. Danny is saying it while sitting up in bed, but it's not Danny's voice, it's Tony's. There's a very clear distinction between when Danny's talking and when Tony's talking. When Wendy goes in to check on Danny, Tony says that Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. Danny can't wake up, Mrs. Torrance. Danny's just staring at her. Danny's gone away, Mrs. Torrance. She just gives him a hug. Because she probably just thinks that that's like his coping mechanism, is like Tony's gonna be, you know, kind of the protector, I guess you could say, in the situation, and so that's why kind of Danny's just closed in on himself. Now we see Jack walking around, and we hear the radio. The Forest Service is trying to reach out like Dick Halloran had asked him to. Jack goes into Ullman's office where the radio is located and slowly takes it apart and basically breaks it. Dick calls the Forest Service back, and they tell him that nobody at the hotel answered. Dick is really worried, and next we see it's 8 a.m. He's now on a plane to Colorado. Jack is back at his typewriter working, and then we see a plane landing in snowy Colorado. At the airport, Dick calls a local garage and asks a friend of his to have a snowcat ready for him once he gets close enough. Dick further explains that he has to go check on the caretakers because they're not doing their job, so he has to go check everything out and see if they have to be replaced. Larry, the garage owner, says that no problem, he'll have everything ready. Him and Dick seem to be, pretty friendly. Now Dick is driving in the snow, and it really looks awful outside. It's very dark, it's hard to see. It's probably about 9, maybe 10 a.m. now, and we see that a big truck has flipped, and he kind of slowly drives past it with the help of the police officers trying to handle the situation and kind of direct traffic. Wendy and Danny are having breakfast and watching Roadrunner. Wendy says she's going to go talk to Daddy and that she'll be right back, and she asks him to stay and watch his cartoons. Tony's still the one doing the talking, though, and poor Wendy looks so frightened and tired, and she says she's going to lock the door behind her. She takes the baseball bat and goes to the room where Jack writes, the Colorado room. He's not there, and she goes up to the typewriter, and now she sees what exactly he has been writing this whole time. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Over and over and over and over. Hundreds of pages of just that line reprinted over and over. She looks even more worried with each page she looks at, and then Jack shows up behind her and asks how she likes it. She jumps and kind of clings to the bat. He comes out of the shadows and asks what she's doing down here. She's fighting back tears and says she wants to talk to him. He says, okay, let's talk. But now she can't remember what she wanted to talk with him about. He takes a step toward her and she takes a step back. Jack says maybe it was about Danny. We kind of get into Danny, and he's listening to the conversation using his shine, and he's seeing the bloody elevator again. Jack asks what should be done with him, and Wendy's scared and crying. She wants Danny to see a doctor, and Jack is being condescending and mocking her. Jack is saying he can't leave his job or his responsibilities, and that Wendy doesn't care about him or think about him. They're now kind of on the stairs going up to the second floor, and there's a big staircase in the Colorado room. Wendy is holding the bat in between them, and she's like, please don't hurt me, don't hurt me. And he's like, Wendy, darling, light of my life, I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm just gonna bash your brains in. She starts kind of swinging the bat at him just to give a little bit more distance, and he tells her to stop swinging the bat and to give it to him. She hits him with the bat, and he falls down the stairs. Next we see her dragging him to the kitchen, and she's basically going to lock him in the pantry, but at first it won't open. She finally gets it open and drags him in. Jack is kind of slowly coming to, but with his head wound he's not faster than her, thankfully. She locks him in and then grabs the knife. She falls to the ground, and he's trying to convince her to open the door. He's all sad, and he's like, I think you really hurt me. I need a doctor. I'm in pain. And she's crying, and he begs her not to leave him in there. She tells him she's going to go and take Danny and the snowcat. She says she'll bring back a doctor. And then Jack gets really serious, and he goes, well, you got a big surprise coming. You're not going anywhere. Wendy runs to the radio first and sees that it's broken, and then she runs outside and sees that the snowcat has also been tampered with. It's now 4 p.m. and Jack is asleep in the pantry, and someone's knocking at the door. It's Grady. Grady tells Jack his heart is not in this, and Jack says he just needs one more chance to prove it. Grady says Wendy is stronger than they all thought, and Jack says only for the moment. Grady says he's going to have to deal with her in the harshest way, and Jack says that he's really looking forward to it. We never see Grady in the scene, we just hear his voice, but the pantry door does open on its own, or with the help of Grady. Dick is slowly making his way to the hotel now that he's in the snowcat. Danny's up still talking like Tony, just repeating red rum over and over again. He writes it on the wall while Wendy's sleeping and then starts playing with the knife. When Wendy wakes up, she sees it in the mirror and sees that red rum is actually murder backwards. Now Jack is breaking down the apartment door with an axe. Wendy takes her and Danny into the bathroom and locks the door. She puts Danny out the window right as Jack is getting into the apartment, but Wendy's a bit too big to fit through the window, and Jack is making his way inside. Wendy tells Danny to run, and now Jack is breaking down the bathroom door. He's kind of acting like the big bad wolf, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. It's kind of spooky. We see Wendy screaming for Jack to stop, and the axe is just slowly making its way inside. So it's that iconic shot of the camera flush up against the wall, kind of against the door. And so we see Wendy leaning up against the wall, and then we just see the axe coming through this little spot in the door that is slowly making bigger. Jack does the iconic "Here's Johnny" once there's a big enough hole in the door. Wendy ends up cutting his hand with a knife, which causes Jack to scream. Dick is close to the hotel now, and they can hear him coming in the snowcat. Danny's running through the hotel and hides in a cabinet in the kitchen, and Jack is now in the kitchen looking for Danny. Wendy's still in the bathroom crying and realizes that she has to go find Danny. Dick has arrived and is making his way inside. The front door is left open, which cannot be good for the hotel. So when Dick gets inside, he starts saying hello, trying to find kind of any sign of life in the hotel, and Jack is walking around and ends up hearing him and tries to kind of go find him in the hotel. Next we see Danny screaming, and Dick Halloran is attacked by Jack. Now that Dick is out of the way, Jack is ready to go after Danny. Danny starts running and Jack chases after him. Wendy's upstairs looking for both of them, and Wendy sees two people in one of the rooms and looks totally horrified. Because again, it's supposed to just be the three of them. So Danny goes to hide outside, and Jack turns on the property lights so that he can see him better. Danny ends up running into the maze to hide, and we get this really cool shot of Danny running through the maze. The camera's down low, so it's kind of right at his back, and we see him, running through the maze in the snow in the dark, and with, very interesting lighting. It's really cool. Makes it feel very intense. So Jack is chasing him and is following the boot prints in the snow, which totally sucks. Wendy's downstairs and see Dick Halloran on the floor, dead, which he doesn't die in the book. The Overlook is now playing tricks on Wendy. It's showing her skeletons everywhere and spider webs, and it's just making it feel even more haunted and creepy. Danny realizes that his shoes are actually leaving prints in the snow, and so he's trying to backtrack a little bit and throw his dad off so that he can hide and hopefully get out of there. Wendy then comes to the elevators, and she also sees the blood coming out, and she's totally horrified. Danny's hiding, and Jack is confused when the footprints stop. So Danny kind of he ends up backtracking footprint for footprint in his previous steps, and then kind of goes off to the side and like buries himself in one of the hedges. Jack yells for Danny more, and he's looking for him. Danny ends up getting out of the maze and kind of runs back the way he came after Jack passes him. Wendy's now outside and standing by the snowcat, and when Danny comes out of the maze, they hug, she puts him in the snowcat, and they leave. Jack is stuck in the maze, and he starts singing, but you can't really understand what he's saying. He's calling out for Wendy, he's staggering through the maze, he's getting slower and slower, and eventually falls down. Next we see him frozen in the snow once morning comes, and we end with a shot zooming in on pictures from the Overlook Hotel over the years, and a picture taken in 1921 in the Gold Ballroom features Jack front and center. Which I actually have that picture. I had a friend give it to me for my birthday this year, and so I'm excited. I want to go find like a really cool, like ornate frame for it, and yeah, I'm gonna hang it in my house. I'm very excited. But that is the end of The Shining. Once we see that picture, credits start to roll, and yeah, that's the end of the Stanley Kubrick version of Stephen King's The Shining. It's a really great movie. Again, kind of like I said, I didn't realize how much I really enjoyed this one. I think I could watch this all the time, which was kind of interesting. I knew it was one that I liked, but I kind of didn't realize I'd like it that much, but I think I watched it like 6 times in the last 2 weeks. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. Would greatly appreciate it, but again, you don't have to. And if you want to find out more of kind of what I'm up to or what movies I'm watching or any of that kind of stuff, you can give me a follow on socials, on Instagram or Twitter, or both if you want, under M Murder Movies. So that's M as in massacre, Murder Movies on Instagram and Twitter. I hope everyone has a safe week or weekend whenever they're listening to this, and next week we are going to dive into Dr. Sleep, which I'm so excited about. Remember to stay safe and stay spooky.